And now for our first sponsor spotlight of the day, I'd like to invite Craig McClellan to the stage to discuss the role ThinkOn plays in the local cybersecurity space. Craig is the founder of ThinkOn and has founded multiple startups in his career. In founding ThinkOn, he capitalized on the cloud movement and has an interesting perspective to provide on cloud security. Craig.
Thank you. They were saying the lights were bright, and they are. I suffer from turning 50 this year, so I hope I can read these slides while I'm actually presenting, because I only have readers, and I look like a fool when I try to move the readers up and down. And I realize I'm between you and some coffee, so I'm going to try to stick back as close as possible to the original schedule. Can you hear me in the back? All right, good. All right, so great. So something about just a quick background. Since the previous presenters, I have no doubt you know who they are and who their firms are. I thought I might spend 30 seconds just giving you a quick snapshot of who ThinkOn is, because there's a lot of people who've never heard of us before. We're a 6-year-old, Ontario-based cloud computing company. I promise that's the last time I'll use the word cloud in this entire talk. We focus on servicing both commercial and public sectors. Oh, that's not a good way to start. Okay, so the real reason why I wanted to speak here today was on our platform, we host SIEM environments for 5 different security service providers. And I've witnessed a lot of interesting activities over the last 5 years that we've been hosting those, in addition to the fact that we service both the federal and provincial government through multiple VORs. And we're pretty proud of the fact that our customers are very sticky. So I feel like we've done a pretty good job listening to what customers want and need. And we've identified some things through the last 5 years that I thought would be helpful to share with you. I have to be very careful with that green button, apparently. So just a quick show of hands. Of the 3 items on this chart, what do you think would be most important for you? What would you prefer to hear from your doctor? Would you like to know when you're sick? Would you like to know how to respond? Or would you actually try to prevent it in the first place? I don't know about you, but 50 goes through a lot of new tests. I definitely want to try to enjoy some prevention in my life. And really what I'm going to talk about is prevention for the next 15 minutes. So obviously, SIEM tools are an important part of the operational fabric of the future. I could, okay, sorry, the screen here is changing, but not there. Unfortunately, actually a quick show of hands, is anyone here concerned about the amount of money you spend operating a SIEM environment? I see one hand. Good. Maybe 2. Awesome. So am I. As much as I want to sell more infrastructure to these people that operate SIEMs, I realize that eventually these costs become unmanageable, and what happens is people leave and people stop paying for services. So that's really one of the key drivers of what I'm going to talk about today. At the same time, we have this problem. In most situations, we trust people to do the right things. We have a house party. We keep a lock on the front door. Either we let our guests in, maybe our 14-year-old child lets our guests in, but regardless, we tend to screen our people at the door, and then we don't look around what's happening inside. I like this visual, though, because I've actually had this happen where we've discovered a guest walking into the wrong room. I think it was an accident. I don't know. We knew the person, but if we have a big party, inevitably we're going to have the same problem, right? People get inside the building, inside their house, inside the cottage, wherever it is, and next thing you know, people are doing things that we just didn't expect, hopefully not with the gun, but it could happen. So current event monitoring technologies fueled or feeding into SIEMs don't always address the full picture of the risk, right? So first of all, people try to cut their costs by reducing the amount of data they're retaining or the data they're collecting, so they focus on the perimeter, right? SaaS usage goes unaudited. Show of hands, who here is using a SaaS application somewhere in their business today? Okay, I'm really not touching that button, but it keeps going, so I apologize for that. Unstructured data is often ignored, whether it's in Box or sitting in some other sort of unstructured data set. Digital evidence is if retained, is often not redacted, meaning I might keep logs for longer than I would normally keep them because I'm concerned about being able to do long-tail discovery, but unfortunately I have PI in those logs, whether it's credit card numbers or healthcare numbers. So how do I deal with that? Internal activities are very often left unmonitored or certainly not retained for long periods of time. And unlike external attacks, inside jobs evolve very slowly by design, right? Because people think they have more time and they're more sophisticated. So these things oftentimes avoid manual detection. So, and if that wasn't bad enough, the expansion of the attack surface is a big problem. I think everyone here, we've probably had two great talks this morning to talk about that. There's a much wider range of motivators. The list goes on, but the bottom line is only getting worse, and you've heard that for 2 days, so I don't even need to say that again. So there are 3 things that we've learned we cannot trust, though, and I believe this straight to my core. No matter how much we train our users, and for example, with our federal government validation, we have to train our employees every 3 months. We have to train them every time they change jobs. We have to train them every time we hire a new person. And I'm convinced that regardless of how much we train them, they'll still make mistakes. It's inevitable. It's humans. Secondly, all applications are flawed somewhere. You can sit through a demonstration and see some interesting anti-malware software still manage to miss 80% of the malware that could be thrown at it. And then endpoints, where users meet applications, it's a problem. I do care very greatly about the bring your own device to work, but I employ I employ Apple fans, and I don't want to provide Apple as a standard platform, for example. How do we deal with these? Because everyone says, well, the Mac's impermeable. We don't have to worry about, sorts of bad things happening, which is also nonsense. So we've just taken it for granted that these are 3 things that we cannot trust in our environment. At the same time, the amount of data that's being collected is obscene. 2.5 exabytes a day being collected now in the known Western world. God knows how much data we're really talking about, but think about your own environment. We back up a modest number of customers, say roughly 700, and we have 50, 60, maybe 70 petabytes of data under management that's inside our environment. That's just normal, everyday commercial customers. It's frightening. So 4 things to think about. Many security breaches occur as a result of internal employees. We all hopefully agree with that. Companies are collecting and amassing larger and larger volumes of data, primarily to feed AI and machine learning. We could go on forever about the applicability of that, but training data is absolutely critical. What's odd about training data is very few people think about the destruction of training data after it's been through the training rigor, because really, should we be keeping training data? Additional privacy standards are going to drive more and more demand for analysis, which again feeds into longer and longer term log retention. And really, there's no way to currently collect telemetry data and store it anonymously. All of the SIEMs that we host for other service providers store data. They don't anonymize data. And while there are technologies that allow you to do it, it's not trivial. So I think there's really 5 things that we should be doing. We can be doing, you can be doing, we all should all be doing. We need to be ready to collect 100 times more data than we are today to feed our SIEM environments. And that's just the cold hard reality. So if you think about how much you're paying today, how much you're paying a third-party provider to analyze data, you've got to think about 100x and what 100x means to your costs. We have to create, save, and schedule repeatable searches because we're going to have to go through a distillation process. If you pump 100x through a SIEM, 1 thing's going to happen. You're going to spend a lot more money. 2 things are going to happen, though. It probably is going to break. So we've got to find different ways to identify abnormal activities. We have to go through a series of filtering processes in order to get to that. Whether it's AI and machine learning-driven filtering, the reality is this is going to be part of the fabric of what we do. Then we have to identify really high-value log data and feed that back into more sophisticated tools like what you have today. At the same time, we have to identify data leakage events. It's a very different process. Data leakage as a service provider means something very different to you as a consumer. For instance, in the data leakage world that I worry about, my job is to help you clean up data more so than help you and find data that's leaked as opposed to tell you when data is leaked because I don't know what leakage looks like. You have to be the ones that know what leakage looks like, which I realize sounds weird, but if you think about it long enough, it'll make sense. I don't know your data because I don't read your data. And then if we're retaining data for long periods of time, we have to be able to redact it if you want to make use of it because you have to be able to de-anonymize it eventually if you need to do some long tail analysis. So I propose that we have to think differently through 7 straightforward steps. First of all, most evidence today that you're collecting and storing in a SIEM environment is not tamper-proof. It's not immutable. It's stored on traditional high-speed storage devices. More often than not, it's stored on flash storage because of the high processing requirements. But if you ask your provider, if you look internally, I would be very surprised if it was actually stored in immutable form, which means it's not evidence, it's just analysis data. So one thing to think about. The second thing to think about is people have done a good job collecting log data. As you grow 100x, if you believe me when I say 100x, it's going to become more difficult to store this data centrally because storage subsystems aren't designed to handle 100x growth easily. So it's going to require a different type of storage device. And if it's not all indexed and made available for search at time of ingest, it's not going to be relevant because, and if you think about this, anyone that's ever dealt with the backup struggles, what used to be called the backup window, if you're trying to process data not real time, the backup window or the processing window will no longer allow you to do it, especially if you're talking 100x growth in data. So you have to process it at time of ingest. If you believe that your SIEM can't handle the volume, you've got to think of a different way to process it so that you can enable your SIEM environment to process it later. This is an interesting point for me because I actually have to issue certificates of destruction to customers about once a month. You know how hard it is to get a certificate of destruction from a cloud vendor? I said it again, sorry. It's very hard because they won't issue certificates of destruction. But if you're thinking about data through its natural life cycle and you're storing PI, and while I said it should be anonymized, you're still storing the data, organizations are going to demand, people, your customers, your suppliers, your ecosystem are going to demand that you produce evidence that you did destroy the data at some point in time. You don't get a pass because there's a security guy in the room. You're going to have to account for that. Integrated search is being able to run passive analysis against your data. Because there's so much of it that's going to be available, you're going to have to do a lot of passive processing. You're going to have to push a lot of workload off. It's going to become much more challenging, and you need a different tool set for that. And as I've been saying, anonymization or red action is really an important point. For instance, a simple example, but we have a client over in Denmark, and they have resumes and they have job descriptions. And everyone here knows what GDPR means. It means you can't keep a resume more than 6 months after the person wasn't hired. Well, how does a traditional document management system tell the difference between a resume and a job description? It can't. So you have to redact the data at time of ingest so that even if a resume inadvertently stays inside a system or gets picked up because it has a bad word in it, and if you're filtering emails, you're going to pick up a lot of attachments with words that may not pass through your security systems naturally. We're going to have to actually redact it so we don't have to worry about getting in trouble later. And that's very much a real-world problem because everyone's keeping things like resumes for long periods of time because, frankly, you want to keep a resume so you can go back and recruit later. Well, GDPR forbids it, for example. And then last point is, and why it goes back to the whole idea of more centralization, is you're the experts in the room. Hardening a broad attack surface is a nightmare at best at times. And if we have so much log data in one place, and if I really want access to your systems, your log data is where I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the pub beside your office, because I'm going to social engineer my way in, and I'm going to go to your log data, because I've got all the time in the world to walk through it. All the more reason to redact it, all the more reason to look at a different way of storing it, make it immutable so I can't tamper with it. These are the 7 things that I believe you need to do in order to prepare yourself for that 100x world. So hopefully I got us back on time. There's coffee outside. I would ask that if anyone's interested in learning more about what we do, because I didn't want to make this a commercial, we have a breakout room at the far end of the hall where we're going to be showing some of the things we do, and we're happy to talk to you in more detail about it. But I really want to end this by saying thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. And anyone going back to Toronto, good luck on that traffic. It's too early to joke about some of these things, but I'm thinking I have a meeting at like 12:30, and I don't know how I'm going to get there. But anyway, thanks again for your time. Appreciate it.